Swallowing, all the things that the speech pathologist might work with when it comes to Parkinson's conditions or things impacted by Parkinson's. And so I've got some information on each of these, but like I said, we won't necessarily spend time on all of them unless you guys want to. But voice is a really important part. I think most people think about voice when they think about Parkinson's related changes. And so voice can mean a lot of things. Does anybody have any idea? What do you think of when you think of voice? Anyone want to throw anything out? Talking, yeah.
Expresses our personality.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of what I think about too, is having your voice is empowering, right? And it's something you don't want to lose. Voice, we separate from speech. And so a lot of times, when we talk about it, we use the one word for voice, but in speech pathology, we separate the two because voice is just how the quality of your voice. So if you just say, "aw," it tells us about the pitch, it tells us about things that, like changes that happen with Parkinson's, like whether your voice is raspy or breathy. Voice can also include volume. But when we talk about speech in a minute, we're going to talk about the speech sounds, so articulation. So that's one way that we separate the two. So if we're just thinking about voice, things that can happen with Parkinson's, like the breathiness, the hoarseness, raspiness, also tremulous voice. That's a little harder to hear, but you might have heard it. The volume, the number one thing that happens with volume is just decreased volume. In very severe cases, it might be a whisper. People might feel like they've lost the power in their voice, or that they're losing endurance. So their voice is not working as well for them. Their voice gets tired. Sometimes people tell me at the end of the day or after talking quite a bit. The reasons why voice changes. Have you heard of bradykinesia? It's kind of like a medical term. It just means slow movement. So the muscles move slower. And so it can affect voice. Rigidity, muscles become rigid. So the muscles that work the vocal cords are very, very tiny, but they're very susceptible to these. They're probably even more susceptible because they are so tiny. And so those muscles in here they're going to be susceptible to the same things that you might be experiencing in larger muscles, like the legs or the arms. There are anatomical changes that happen to everybody in the vocal cords as we get older. The vocal cords can become thinner, they can become a little bit more bowed with age, but Parkinson's seems to speed that up, and that can cause sort of the breathiness in the voice. There's also decreased sensory information, which might be why other people think that you're soft and you may not notice. Has anyone experienced that? Yeah. So there are two messages from the brain, between the brain and the muscle. And this is for the entire system. But there's a message from the brain that tells the muscle what to do, to move. And then there's a message from the muscle to the brain, that's the sensory input. It's telling your brain, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is how fast I'm moving, this is where my arm is in space. Both of those messages can become weakened with Parkinson's. So the message going to the muscle might be slower, and then the message from the muscle going to the brain is sort of dampened. It's just not as strong. And so that sensory input, you think that you're being loud enough, it feels normal, but actually the perception of other people is that you're too soft. And so that's sometimes why there's a disconnect with that. The other things that affect voice are posture, right? We know Parkinson's can cause sort of a stooped posture, and I know you guys work on that really hard in here. But if you think about if you are sort of tipped down and your voice is being directed down, on top of it being soft, that's really going to impact the voice or how well people hear you. And then breath support. Breath support's a huge thing. I'll talk a little bit about respiration. But the muscles of, well, there are muscles. There's one primary muscle of respiration, and that's the diaphragm. But it's also, just like all the other muscles, susceptible to rigidity and slowness of movement. And what happens if you don't use a muscle? Yeah, right. You know, like use it or lose it, that mentality. It's like if you don't use it, it will atrophy, it'll get weaker over time. And that's a lot of the reasons why you can have such a rebound in your voice, is because maybe you have the power to use good volume, but you're just not using it. And a lot of that is respiration, because we need strong breath support for our voice to work. And so there's a lot, sometimes we focus a lot on respiration because that gives you the power for volume. Medications can cause changes to respiration, and well, that causes more dyskinesia, that makes it more difficult. And then we talked about the postural changes, but if you think about, if you do have somewhat of a stooped posture, your lungs cannot expand as fully, right? They're kind of crunched. And so that's really key, that the work that you're doing to kind of keep the frame open so that you can take that full breath will also help your voice. There are a few programs that are devoted to voice and speech for Parkinson's. One of them is called LSVT Loud. It was developed decades ago. I want to say 40 years ago, maybe more. It's the Lee Silverman voice therapy, also called Loud. And it's a great program. Both of them are great. This one is very rigid though. It's 4 weeks of therapy, 4 days a week. You have to do homework exercises after your therapy. So the idea behind that is you intensively work out the voice so that you get that great effect of, you have diminished use of the voice. Within 4 weeks, you're going to see a big difference. And also just kind of setting a new routine. That's part of the beauty of how that one works. But then Speak Out came around. It's done by the Parkinson's Voice Project. It came around, I want to say, in 2010. And it's not as rigid. Their approach was, let's make this as practical as possible, because not everyone can, well, Medicare for reimbursement for one is an issue for 17 visits, and on top of the time commitment of that. So they average about 12 therapy sessions to see that improvement. And sometimes people don't get to their target volume after those 12 visits, and I might see them like 3 months later and they continue to make improvement. So they're very similar programs, different approach. If you've ever heard Speak with Intent or Say It with Intent, that's from the Speak Out program. Is everyone pretty familiar with that program? You've heard of it or no? Okay, yeah. I can talk more about it if you want, or we can just keep moving. I want to talk about Speech Vibe real quick. This is kind of new too. This is more for people who maybe didn't go through any of the voice programs, and it's really hard to gain back voice if you're in the severe stages, if you are at a whisper, really hard to gain your voice at that point. So it's really recommended to start those programs early on, even like first signs, because then you know what to do. You can become your own therapist. You can maintain your voice longer if you just know what to do early on. But the Speech Vibe is really good for people who may have missed that. And it works, think of it as a hearing aid, but because it fits on your ear like a hearing aid and it goes in your ear, but it's doing the opposite thing. It's actually making noise. And it's taking advantage of a reflex we all have in our brain. If you walk into a noisy room, like a noisy restaurant, what are you going to do?
Speak louder.
Speak louder, yeah. It's a reflex. And so if you put this in your ear and you hear this noise that only you can hear, you're automatically going to speak up. And so sometimes that's a good trick for the brain so that other people can hear you better. It is covered by insurances, including Medicare, but you have to go through a speech therapist to kind of make sure you're a good candidate for it. Respiratory muscle strength training is really important for a lot of reasons. I'll probably touch upon it again when we get to swallowing, because it was actually created for people with swallowing for people with Parkinson's and swallowing issues, which is really cool. It was really devoted just for this population, but they found it had extra benefits, like for voice. It can make your voice stronger. It can work on your respiratory strength, which we were talking about. And it looks like this. This is the device. Insurance won't cover it, but it's only $60. I've gotten to where I recommend it for almost everyone because almost everyone needs it. It has a little mouthpiece. Think of it as like I think I put on there barbell for your respiration. It's a workout program. You can add resistance, so that's why I think of it as it's resistance training for respiration. And then other solutions, use your voice. We talked about if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So conversational practice, using a good strong voice when you're in fear. I know that Lori puts you guys through some voice exercises. That's so important. Take advantage of this to be loud, use that strong voice. But anything that you do, there are online voice classes. Has anyone ever gone to the pro-sponsored one? It's online. I've always been curious about it. I think they do a mixture of things like word finding and conversation and stuff. So, and that's a free resource just to kind of get some practice with your voice. But the Parkinson's Voice Project has Monday through Friday, they do a brand new online class. So that's all you're doing is you're practicing your voice. They want you to go through the program first so you kind of know what you're doing when you join, but that's a resource you'll have for the rest of your life. So there are some options out there. You know, of course, if you want to do something online, if you can't get out of the home, but the best thing is really just that social interaction with other people. And that's going to be a common refrain for me, so you might hear about that again, but that's going to be the best thing for your voice, for your speech, for your cognition, all of it. It's just ongoing social interaction, staying engaged. I'm going to skip through that. So I'm moving on to speech. Are we good with that? Yeah? Okay, so speech is speech clarity, which we talked about. A lot of people have difficulty with it. It's a similar situation where you may not notice it and it's other people asking you to repeat. What happens with speech, same thing. So there's slowness of movement, rigidity of the muscles. Maybe there's some freezing too. Freezing is not that well understood, but we know that it happens. And if you think about how specific you have to be and how the fine motor involved just to say a single word, to hit all the target spots in the mouth for just one word, right? So now think about having a conversation or even putting a sentence together. That's a really precise, specialized thing that the human body can do. So it makes sense that if your muscles are moving more slowly, or there's not as much sensation, or they're rigid, that it would show up in speech, right? It's a very difficult thing to do that I think we just kind of take for granted. The other thing is people might have trouble with speeding up, or even just bursts of speed. And so if you're having trouble with being clear, the speed's probably not going to help you, right? Just like voice, the idea of speaking with intent, you can kind of encompass all of this in one idea, speak with intent, and that is including volume, it's including speech clarity, it's including the intonation. So that's kind of how the program works. It's getting you to think about one thing. Just be intentional when you speak to try to do all of that at the same time. And we've talked about that. So solutions for if you are having trouble with speech clarity, aside from doing like a speak out program or the loud, you're going to find out I do a hybrid of the two, and I kind of these days I really prefer speak out, so I might refer to it more. Things that you can do, you can automate some things, right? So some people have trouble Like I remember I worked with somebody and she had trouble placing an order at the Starbucks using their, like the drive-through. So there's that distance, you can't see the person. And so we practiced the phrase that she was going to use every time she went through the drive-through. So we call that a script because it's something you know you're going to say. So just automating something like that, practicing it and being very deliberate with your delivery, that can help. Having a regular program, and it could be something that you're doing at home. Like if you're already reading, maybe just practice reading aloud for 5 minutes. And those 5 minutes, you're really working on clear speech. So having something regular to kind of help you, getting feedback, whether you're recording yourself on your smartphone to hear how clear it was, or just asking someone to let you know if the speech clarity is changing. Sometimes no one likes to be interrupted. So sometimes we recommend like a cue. So if let's say you're in a group and you're talking at dinner and your loved one wants to let you know that you need to either speak up or be more clear, sometimes you can just make a signal. Like I know somebody who uses this because his trouble is more the clarity. So she just sort of does this as a reminder to be more intentional. So it doesn't have to be it can be real subtle like that, but having somebody that gives you feedback can be really helpful. And in the moment, you don't have to stop what you're doing. Okay, other things to consider. If it's important, you might want to avoid multitasking. We're going to talk about multitasking when we get to cognition, but sometimes that's really hard. You're trying to be clear and deliberate, but you're also walking, or you're also putting groceries away. Maybe stopping and so you can deliver that message well is really the solution for that moment. Decreasing background noise, that's always helpful. It might be your medication cycle is affecting these periods of difficulty with speech clarity, and that's a good time to let your doctor know. Trying to work through the medications with your doctor because we talked about how that's such a fine motor skill, it might be what really shows up for you. And so keeping an eye on it and letting your doctor know could be helpful. When I talked about, possibly recording yourself. Anybody have any thoughts on speech? Can we move on?
I think it's great because you're giving me the words to use in class.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Okay, facial expression. Any interest here? Should we skip it? Yeah, okay. So facial expression, just like any of the other muscles we were talking about, it can be impacted because all the expression comes from muscles of the face. They're just smaller muscles. Tell me why facial expression is important. Anybody? Yeah. Can you say it louder?
Yes, it amplifies what you're saying with your words.
Yeah. So it can amplify what you're trying to say. It also can stand on its own, right? Sometimes all you have to do is give a look. People know what you mean. What about that human connection? Right? If I say, oh, it's really nice to see you, but I'm not smiling, it may not seem genuine, right?
Is it true that people with Parkinson don't smile very often? I've heard that.
Yes, so what can happen, I wouldn't say they don't smile. What can happen is the masked face. Have you heard that term? Yeah, so what happens is just like the other muscles, they might become rigid or stiff. And if you're not using them, well, they're just diminished. They don't respond as well. They also have found that the last one, to get to your peak expression, that means like your full smile, it takes longer. Because we've got slower muscles, right? So it might take longer to get to that smile. And we're talking, fractions of seconds, but that's how fast conversation moves. Mask-like face expression is really just kind of more of like a blank face, sort of a flat affect. There's also less blinking involved. And they've done studies and asked people to look at all these different facial expressions and people who, like they had no idea what they were looking at. They didn't know that some of the faces were faces of people with Parkinson's. And they were to describe the emotion behind what they thought they saw in the faces. And people with Parkinson's were often thought to be hostile or angry. Right? What a bummer.
Or even
So-
not interested. Just
Yeah,
like,
disinterested, yeah.
They're not listening to me or.
Right, because your facial expression is just not conveying how you feel. So, and it's good to know that, right? And it's also good to know that you can do things about it. So some things that are helpful are using a mirror now and then for feedback. We talked about how that sensory loop. So your muscle is telling your brain that it's moving, but it may not, that message is not as strong as it used to be. So if you use a mirror, you can match how you feel with what you see, what you're trying to achieve. You might think you're smiling in a photo and then you see the photo and you're like, well, that might be 20% of a smile, but it's not really how it felt. And so if you're using the mirror, you can kind of see and then feel what a 100% smile feels like. Facial exercises are helpful. They can increase blood flow to those muscles. You can also do just like, sort of like I can't do it right now, but like just a little bit of a massage, just massaging that area to wake them up. You're just trying to wake up the muscles, and then you can go into some exercises. And basically, we're like, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's just diminished muscle strength. And so just like any other muscle, you're trying to wake it up and use it to its full expression. And so I have, on my website, I made a video. I think it's like 20 minutes. I haven't looked at it in a while. That you can play and do the exercises with the video. Because I know it's hard to like make yourself sit down in the mirror and make funny faces, right? Like, because some of them are like, raise your eyebrow, open your eyes wide, tightly close your eyes, smile as big as you can, and you have to hold it for like 10 seconds. So it can feel kind of silly. So, you can do it with the video and you can play it as many times as you need to. The other benefit is I know that if I were to sit down and do these exercises, you're supposed to hold it for 10 seconds. I would probably, I would cut myself short. And so part of the benefit of that is like you sit down, you do it, you're committed, you're done with it. But the idea is like just to kind of wake up the muscles, get them active. And then, so after you warm them up, then you can look in the mirror and you can practice, okay, well, what does my, 50% smile look like? If I'm meeting a stranger, what is that going to feel like? If I'm extremely happy and I want to let my visitors know that I'm so happy to see them, what does that feel like when you give that big smile? So go through the exercises, warm up, and then shoot for, getting your target expression that you're aiming for. I thought your hand up, no? Okay.
Can you find it on YouTube?
It is on YouTube, yeah, if you just, actually, so I have these cards that have the full address that, I brought to hand out. But also if you just do a search for Amplify Speech Therapy Facial Expressions or something like that, facial exercises, either one should bring you up to the video there. And it has a list of the exercises. It's like an explanation of why, like these muscles are used for this. Eyebrow lift can be, like surprise, fear, lots of different expressions that you can aim for that way. Okay, yeah.
So how often do you do that?
Totally up to you. So if you hadn't done anything and you want to kind of build up, like hit it strong, basically, anytime it's a Parkinson's related thing, I would say do it with high intensity and then taper off and just do something regularly. So you could do it, every day for a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then maybe once a week is good. And part of that's going to change and shift, and that's just part of the disease process. And so, checking in the mirror is helpful. And then I think I need to do some more of these for a little while, and then you can kind of do more of maintenance. Anything else? Okay, moving on. I'm gonna say language, because language, I'm gonna spend a little time on it in cognition. Actually, that's what's next. So we're gonna skip through that to cognition. We're doing pretty good. This is really just to show you where symptoms can happen. And so what they're finding is MCI, which I will define in a minute. MCI is happening very, very early stages. So if 0 is the time that you're diagnosed, we now know that 10 years earlier, people might have started symptoms such as sleep behavior changes, right? And then we know, like when other things might show up, like swallowing issues kind of later on. That's not true for everyone, by the way, but we know that early cognitive symptoms might be showing up very close to when someone might be diagnosed. And I want to define MCI for you. Let's skip through it. MCI, mild cognitive impairment, is when maybe only you are noticing changes. Maybe your loved ones notice, but it's so mild that it's not really impacting your success in day-to-day life. Unlike dementia, where it's becoming difficult to be independent and successful. Mild cognitive impairment is just, you're forgetting things more often, but you're still succeeding in life. It's not, and we used to think that MCI was going to turn into dementia. We know that's not the case anymore. In the general population, only about 1/3 of people who have MCI actually develop dementia. The other thing that we know now is that if you get some early intervention, if you're starting to have trouble with things like memory or processing or whatever it might be, if you get some early intervention, you can actually reduce your risk of turning into dementia. And those are called the modifiable risk factors. And that's a whole discussion at length, so we won't go into too much of that. About 25% of people with Parkinson's have Parkinson's-related dementia. But I am focusing right now on just like, what is MCI, what can we do about it? We know that there are some general things that happen with cognition when Parkinson's is in the picture. And so some of those things are like visual spatial changes, attention, memory, language, and executive function. And executive function is the complex thing that the brain does. It's like it uses multiple parts of the brain. For example, like planning a vacation would require quite a bit of different parts of the brain for like, you might be using memory, you might be comparing different rates, you might be problem solving. And so all the complexity of that makes that an executive function. But conversation is also an executive function. If you think about it, you're using language, you're using social roles. You might be using motor planning, because speech, right? You're using your memory and attention, and you might be strategizing. How am I going to have this conversation, or negotiating? So all of that it's a very complex thing that we do.
What does visuospatial mean?
Yeah, it's visual perception and how that relates to space. So that's more of an occupational therapy rehab, but I do test it because it can tell us a lot about cognition. And one way that I test it is by memory. So memory, you can have verbal memory and you can have nonverbal memory. And we can use visual spatial interpretation and memory of visual spatial. It's kind of, I'd have to show you rather than describe it. Separate from verbal memory. So if you're having trouble with language, we don't want to disqualify your memory because I'm asking you to remember a list of words. So maybe I use a diagram instead. But people with dementia start to have trouble with visual spatial difficulty. And then that's one thing, just one area that Parkinson's also can start to have trouble with early. It's not very severe, but it's, you know, one of the early features, domains under NCI. And then there are several types of attention, which I'll get to. So explaining why some of these things happen is interesting because one of them is attention. We need attention to form a memory. And has anybody noticed difficulty with just kind of focusing after getting Parkinson's? Okay, so that's your brain. It's just not, you know, part of it is current technology, right? But that's that part of your brain that you normally didn't have to tell it to focus. And now you're having to make it work because it needs to go through the substantia nigra, that part of the brain that has been depleted of dopamine. And it's sort of a gatehouse for a lot of things the brain does to synthesize information. With that is the impaired inhibitory control. All that means is it's the part of the brain that filters out information. So if you're having trouble focusing, but find yourself very distracted often, that's why. It's those two are just not working as well. And it's something, like I said, normally it was automatic. Before it was automatic. And now with Parkinson's, it's like it's taken away that sort of automatic part of the brain. So if you're having a conversation and maybe you have an idea and you get distracted and then you have trouble focusing, or somebody walks by and then you get distracted on what they're doing, you've lost the conversation. That's a really common thing. The working memory is our ability to, well, let me give you an example. Like driving a car involves working memory, or cooking a meal. You need to know where you are, at what stage you are, what's already been done, what's coming next. When you're driving a car, you need to remember who's in your left-hand lane, where you're turning, all of that. You only need to remember that temporarily, and then your brain can filter it out. But if the brain is not filtering out information as well, it can be overwhelming. It can also be harder to focus and have that attention. And then verbal fluency is the opposite of what I have right now. Verbal fluency is like word finding, putting your thoughts together in a coherent sentence. And then dual tasking is that ability to do two things at once, right? Being able to walk and have a conversation, or being able to put your dishes away while you're talking. That becomes a little bit harder. And I think that's also related to your attention and the ability to filter out things. There were a couple of studies that I was just going to highlight. One of them was done some time ago, but I really like Troche. I think that's how you say her name. She does like great research specific to Parkinson's. And they tested verbal fluency in people who have Parkinson's and people who don't, but are similar age. So they had no diagnosis, but they're similar age, the controls. And what they found when they asked people to repeat sentences and they got longer and longer, there was no difference. But when they asked people with Parkinson's to make your own sentence generation, generate your own sentence, that's where there was a big difference. So we know that it's harder. We know that asking the brain to do all these different things at once is really hard. So conversation becomes harder. Word finding becomes harder. And then the other study I wanted to point out was, this was a really complex study, the second one, but very good. They looked at so many different things. And also they used, similar age controls with people with Parkinson's as comparison. And they had them dual task. They looked at their processing speed for communication. Because normally we look at processing speed to do something. They were focused on communication. And processing speed slowed down for people with Parkinson's. Their working memory seemed more impaired. And then the global coherence is the ability to respond to a conversation on topic. Not loosely related, not tangential going in another direction, but like on topic, meaningful. And they had ways of rating this. But that was an area that was really difficult for people with Parkinson's. So I don't know if that's something people can relate to. Do you have some?
Just had a question, do you know in these studies, did they study like large groups that both were on medication and were on various medications, or?
I know that the second one they addressed medication. I don't remember in the first one if they did. Yeah. That's such a good question then, because there's just so much like difference. There can be a big difference,
Yeah,
right?
I was just wondering about the inhibition control, things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think, and this is a global statement, but I think most of the stuff I read, they address it, but they're not taking people off medicines to do the exams. They're usually trying to capture people in like their peak time. Okay, so I wanted to spend some time talking about like things you can do, right? So if we know that this is challenging, the number one thing you can do is stay engaged. What happens if you don't use these brain functions? They're not going to get better. But yes, Lori.
Can I just say something? And this relates back to our combo 1 and our combo 2 and that inhibition, right? That I hope this is okay that I
Yeah.
Our combo 1 is jab cross, step back, step forward, jab cross. Stay there, don't step back again. And that's that inhibition. And how many of you struggle with that? We go jab cross, step back, step in, and then you back up again. And I'm always saying, stay there, stay there.
Yeah.
So we're trying to overcome that. So we're targeting that all the time in
Yeah.
class, all the time. You said so many other things too that
Well, working memory, because you have stations and you have to rotate, and so you're constantly having to keep track of where you are, what's next, and then you change the plan, and then you have to do all of that is so good for the brain, and you're moving.
right. So know that how much we're really addressing almost everything she says. Even when I say count out loud, count, and how many of you will count, but not very loud. And that's what we need, is we need that projection, and there is a reason behind it.
You're madness.
Yeah.
And here's the place to do it, right? Be loud.
Yeah.
Okay, we were talking about, oh yeah, so I just wanted to give you some things that you can do for preservation, really, right? So if we talked about there are modifiable risk factors, one of the best things you can do for your brain is just stimulate it. So that goes kind of to what Lori's saying. You're stimulating the brain by being in here. You're doing all the things that are challenging over and over again because you want to preserve that brain function, you want to preserve that skill. So these are some based on words, things that you can do. You can, I like some games. There are games that I like that you can do that they're word games. You don't even have to, you can play it as a game with your family. It's a fun way to kind of challenge your brain, or you could just take the cards and do it on your own, or do the cards with another person while you're, whatever, or after dinner, and just include it in your day so that you're getting this practice in. But there's word games you can do that you don't need any board game supplies or tools for. And one of them is just like listing categories. So I might say, think of 20 things that you would see at I'm trying to think of one I don't always use. I always use the same ones over and over again. 20 things that you might take to the beach. And then just go through and see how many you can come up with. You can do it with another person where you're alternating to get to 20. You can use the alphabets, which will use a little bit of working memory. So A, what would I need at the beach? It starts with an A. Anybody?
Air mattress.
Air mattress? B,
Beach ball. Banana.
beach ball. C,
A cooler.
a cooler. D,
Cantaloupe.
Cantaloupe, I like cantaloupe. What was the D?
Dog.
Dog, take your dog. Yeah, if you play with another person, you can go back and forth. You can keep track of the ones you can't think of anything for, come back to them. That's your working memory, right? You put a pin in it, I gotta remember that, come back to it. So that's, something you can do in the car while you're waiting in a doctor's office. Just kind of stimulate your brain this way. Retelling stories is a great way to work on word finding, generation of, we're talking about word generation or generating sentences. So it could be a book that you read, or a movie you recently watched, or it could be, maybe you sit down with your family and you pull out old photos and you talk about your favorite vacation. And so you're kind of retelling the story, putting your brain through that work of having to find the right words and put your thoughts together. And then having conversations. Conversations, like I mentioned, is like a very technical thing the brain does, uses so many parts of the brain. But what happens when our voice starts to fail us? First, people will do what?
Stay quiet.
Isolate, what did you say?
Stay quiet.
Stay quiet, yeah, say less, yeah. So it won't get better if you don't use it, right? So getting yourself out there. And if you don't feel comfortable in all settings, find the ones you do feel comfortable. If this is a really good setting. I'm gonna skip through that. So attention, I touched on, there are many types of attention. Selective attention is when you're trying to focus on one thing and filter other things out. Sustained attention is just staying focused for a really long time. And then alternating attention is going in and out of something. And then divided attention is when you're trying to do two things equally, like walking and talking. That's an easier one because we do it regularly. But there's this cool little YouTube video about how ineffective we are at actually multitasking. It's like, we're not going to do any of those things really well. And so some things we just need to do one thing at a time. I want to show you this. It's still kind of small. This is a good exercise in alternating attention. I'll show you how it works. The goal of this is not to read the word, but to say the location. So you're working on that filter, telling your brain don't read, and just state the location of the word. Whether it's in the top square, the middle square, or the bottom square. So I'll do the first one. Probably gonna mess up. Good. So top, bottom, middle, bottom, top, middle, bottom, top, middle. Right? It takes time to have to kind of process it. Does anybody want to do the second one? Out loud, guys. You can do it in your head. Anyone want to take a chance on the middle row?
What we did,
You want to try it?
middle, top, bottom, top, middle, bottom, middle, top, bottom.
Nice. Yeah. I have a couple of worksheets like this, but so you could do, you could work on this in worksheets. You can do word finding in worksheets too. But, I like the idea of finding a way to work on attention in your day-to-day life, like this class, right? Are there other things that you can do in your home where you're, here's an example. Alternating attention, I'm going to cook dinner while I do the laundry. So at a certain point in my meal preparation, I'm gonna have to pause and go put the laundry into the dryer. So I'm having to switch in and out of tasks. My focus is having to shift. So that's an example. You can set yourself up like that at home where you're kind of challenging yourself in that way. Working memory, I put boxings in here. Working memory, I mentioned, is when you have to kind of keep track of where you are on something, kind of like cooking, and the information is changing all the time. A good way to work on that, and you might get tested like this at a doctor's office, is they have you count backwards by sevens. Yeah, so you start at 100 and you count by sevens backwards. You start at 50, yeah. You can do threes or fours or twos if they're easier. Not the funnest way to work on working memory, but some people like numbers, and so they really like that. There are retelling stories is another way here. So you go to a doctor's visit, you get back in the car, and then you're trying to retell, okay, out loud or in your head, what all did I hear? I'm just trying to keep it fresh and working on that very short-term immediate memory. So the working memory basically decides what turns into a short-term memory or a long-term memory, or gets discarded. And we do that at night when we sleep. So if it's a doctor's visit and you want to retain some of that information, retelling it, going through it will help it to solidify. Conversations, again. Have more conversations. The other thing what we're aiming for here is preservation, right? We're just trying to keep those brain functions working strong by stimulating them. Having a novel conversation is completely different than having a routine conversation. So the conversations I have with my family members tend to be the same conversations for the most part. Right? You will get more out of the conversation in terms of if you're having a novel conversation. So if it's somebody you don't know as well, or you're looking at old photos or reminiscing, that's a novel conversation. You probably haven't had that too many times. You're going to get more brain activity, use more parts of the brain. So it's going to be more stimulating than just having, the same conversations we have every day. Other things that are good for the brain I have on here, and these are part of the modifiable risk factors. Physical activity increases circulation to the brain. We know that that's good for the brain. We know that good sleep is good for the brain. That's how we form memories. And we know that it reduces stress. Physical activity reduces stress too. We know that stress is bad for the brain. The testosterone on the brain is not helpful for memory, for brain health in general. We know that exercise increases this protein in the brain called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factors, what it is. Yes.
So stress is bad for the brain.
Yeah.
So if you have more stress, does it get better? Or should you avoid it?
Avoid stress. And I think I said testosterone, it's cortisol. It's cortisol in the brain. Yeah. Were you joking?
No.
More stress? Why would you have more stress?
Well, you get better at it.
Oh,
So you're using your brain, or you're doing work that is stressful work. So if you stress yourself, will you tolerate it better, or will you do more damage?
I think you're talking about challenge though. A challenge is, yes, you can build strength with challenge if you're talking about exercise especially. But stress, the hormones that it releases are bad for your overall body.
Well, so you're leading the group, and it's stressful. You stop leading the group,
No, because the challenge outweighs the stress, right? Unless it doesn't.
well, that's what I'm asking.
Does it? I mean, everyone has to make their own decision about that, right? If it's too stressful, then maybe, so I'm thinking of someone also that led a group, and that became stressful after a couple of years. I think she just did 1 year, but then she decided, well, I'm just going to do a book club. She's still leading a group. She's still stimulating her brain, but she chose something that she enjoyed more that was less stressful. Does that kind of help? Or find ways to support, delegate work, or see what you can do to reduce the stressful part. Yeah, we can talk some more about that if you want. The other thing for cognition is that I have on here is compensatory. So compensatory strategies are when we still maintain success by finding a way around it. So an example is memory. Memory doesn't respond the way a muscle would, and the brain doesn't. It doesn't, like, you can regenerate in some things, but usually that's after like a stroke or a head injury, you can regenerate. But when it's a progressive condition, you don't regenerate memory. You can learn strategies to work around it. There are many types of memories, and so what I end up doing for people that have trouble is I find out, well, what are their memory strengths? And then we capitalize on those. So if somebody's really good at their organization, then we just get really good at finding compensatory strategies so that they're organized and it supports their memory. Or maybe their visual memory is really good, so we use visual strategies to help them remember the things that they need to do for the day, or what's on their grocery list, or whatever it may be. So you can find other techniques, other ways to work with, and it's still brain work, right? You're just kind of working around the area that's not as strong with something that is stronger. And then another compensatory strategy is you might just need to avoid dual tasking, or pick when it's really important and you need to really just, you can do dual tasking to challenge your brain if it's not a high stakes thing. If it's something that's really important, then you probably want to avoid it. And then minimizing distractions for focus, right? If your goal is to perform really well on something, then maybe minimize that distraction so that your brain can, the filtering part of your brain that's not working can still do, you can get the job done, basically. So that's just kind of thinking differently. You might just need to adjust to where you are now and find a strategy that works for you. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Does anybody want to talk about swallowing? I'm going for almost an hour, so.
Yeah.
How's everyone? Yes, okay. This was interesting. So when they asked people with Parkinson's if they have trouble swallowing, about 35% said yes. But when you had an SLP actually examine swallowing, we're more likely to say 82% of people have trouble with Parkinson's. So there's a disconnect, and I think what happens is because it's so gradual, you might just think, oh yeah, I just always clear my throat, or you might say, oh, it's only cold drinks that make me cough. And so we've kind of found, like a reason that may or may not be. And so, and also I just think it gets easy to live with if you're having trouble with pills. And it's just kind of like, oh, it's just part of my day. But there are some simple strategies that can be helpful. So I would say try not to minimize it, because it also can be pretty serious. We break up swallowing into oral stage, and then the pharyngeal is, what happens here in the throat. And then I want to talk a little bit about drooling and saliva. But some people have trouble with difficulty with chewing. Some people have more trouble with the liquids going the wrong way. So that's how we kind of think about it. Well, is it more of the oral stage where you're having trouble, or pharyngeal? If it's difficulty chewing, obviously you might just need to cut your foods more, go slower. Those are simple things that you can probably troubleshoot. Changing posture might be helpful, right? So if you're having trouble chewing, you might think about, can you sit up a little bit more, or is there something that gives you a little bit more success with swallowing? And then pharyngeal is so difficult. That's, the stuff that we can't see. And that is like 20-something muscles, 6 or 8 cranial nerves. I can't remember exactly right now. I think it's like 26 muscles. And it's a complex thing that we do. And it happens in less than a second. And so if you can think of all the things that can go wrong with the swallow, and it's our airway we're talking about. It could potentially compromise the airway. So it's a pretty serious thing. Let me come back to saliva. Don't let me forget. So this is a picture of what can happen. So number one is, when we have the yellow is the food or liquid in the mouth. Number two is when it, starts to go down. You can see there's like a little ledge there. That's the epiglottis. We call it a trap door because its job is to flap down and close off the airway so everything gets directed the right way. And number three is that action happening. And then number four is it comes back up and the food or liquid is gone. But that's like, fractions of seconds. Everything has to work properly. So if there's any weakness or mistiming, that means our airway is not closed. And that's what's so dangerous. Now add on top of it a weak cough. That's why they came up with this. That's why this was created. It's helping, so what they found was if the swallow's kind of marginal, so what? Because even people without Parkinson's, even I have small amounts of food and liquid going the wrong way, and I'm fine. Because I have a strong cough and I can get it, whatever that foreign material is, out. But the problem with Parkinson's is that diminished cough strength. So this, I mentioned, works by adding resistance to build your cough strength. So to just build back that ability to clear material out of your airway so it doesn't turn into pneumonia. The other benefits of this are, I mentioned it can help with your voice. It also works these tiny muscles for swallowing here, but they're hard to get to. Okay, and then the other benefit is it works the muscles around the mouth, which can help with drooling. Because you have to have a good, if you're gonna blow through that maximum effort, you have to have a good lip seal. And so you're building the strength of your lip muscles as well, which wakes them up, right? And will increase sensation, so you might be more aware of saliva. So it doesn't surprise you. So it can have that benefit.
What's in the box?
Oh yeah, so it's this, I'll pass the box around.
Where do you
I can
get one?
pass this around and just write it down after.
Where do you get one of those?
I don't know if it's available like to anybody, but I had to create an account to order it and I had to prove that I was an SLP. So I'm not sure, but there are other things on the market and I just want to say that they are not like researched. And if they don't allow you to increase resistance, they're not going to have what you want.
And what's the name, what's it called?
It's called EMST. And it costs $60. And I just sell them to people whoever needs one at cost.
And you could get it through you.
Yeah. And I usually use a little device just to see if you even need it. Because I just saw somebody recently and he was off the charts. He doesn't need this. But it's good to know about it. Because, I want him to have that in the back of his head that at some point he might want this. Yeah. So it's a single use item, so I don't want to blow it. Yeah. Well, single person. Yeah, so I probably won't. All you do is you put your mouth on it and you, as hard as you can.
There's a number of them on Amazon. But like you said, they haven't been tested, but one of them says 150, the MST 150.
The one that's been researched is by Aspire, ASPIRE. Because there's a lot of, like gimmicky stuff that, like off market, but they're like the breather. I started going with the breather first until I learned more about it, and it doesn't have resistance. It does have some resistance, but it caps out. It's not going to be the same thing, basically. So there, and I've seen some of them are like $20, but might as well spend 60 and get like the actual thing that was created for this. Okay, so that's a little bit about, like managing drooling. That's a good way to do that. Some of the facial exercises. Swallowing, same reasons, basically, as everything else. Slow movement, rigid muscles, decreased sensations. Sometimes if something goes the wrong way, that cough might come, but it's delayed because of that sensation going back to the brain. It's not telling you that something went the wrong way quickly enough. So I have seen like somebody might cough, but it's, the food or material's already gone down too far. So the cough does nothing for them. And then respiration is, a part of this too. That goes to the cough strength. You need to have a really strong cough to be able to expel anything. And a lot of people just have problems with pills. So I want to talk about that real quickly. Simple thing you can do with taking medicines is put them in applesauce or puree. Liquids are the hardest thing to swallow. They move quickly. And so if you can eliminate the liquids when you're taking pills and just put them with applesauce or pudding or whatever, it will help to lubricate, takes away the liquid, which is so challenging, and it can just go down a lot easier. You can use what I call a hard swallow. It's also called an effortful swallow, and that's where you swallow hard. It's like thinking about being deliberate again, and then thinking of it as a pill. As a horse pill or like a pebble that you have to swallow. Just kind of bear down. And when we do the X-ray swallow study, I can see the difference in people swallow if I tell them to swallow hard. It really does get better muscle contraction. So just by thinking, I'm taking my pills, I need to swallow hard, you can pass them a lot easier, a lot easier. And then we talked about the EMST, and then sometimes swallow therapy. The thing about swallowing is it is so complex. It could look different from one person to the next. So it's not a good idea to give general advice. And so that's why I feel like the easiest thing that's still general is a hard swallow, because it helps everybody. The EMST, because cough strength, that's pretty general. And, here's another general one, smaller sips, right? We know liquid is the hardest. Take smaller sips, just making it easier on your body to manage. The throat is a very tiny space. And so if you're taking a large amount of water and you're coughing, that's pretty easy to fix, right? And then there are studies. I mentioned that X-ray swallow study is probably the one I would recommend for anyone with Parkinson's, because then you can see the side view of what's happening with the swallow. And so you can do that just so we usually start with like we call it a clinical swallow exam, where I just watch people eat and drink and see, okay, well, does this help? Does this help? And if we're not sure, then we might, recommend the study. Or sometimes people just want the study to get a baseline. Sometimes we do the study because people are thinking about getting like a DBS. And so we just want to see, well, what's your baseline? So we can use the study in that way too. But in terms of addressing swallowing, some things, like pretty straightforward. But sometimes you need to do the study and see exactly what is helpful to you. Anybody have any thoughts or questions about swallowing? Okay.
Drooling comes in that category, right?
Yeah, that's what, yes and no. I tend to put it more into facial expression because it has to do with more of like just decreased sensation. And so if you're waking up the muscles, you're gonna have better control of saliva. Sometimes it's postural too, right? So sometimes if someone has a bit of a stooped posture and they don't feel that their mouth is filled with saliva, they go to get up, and then what's gonna happen? So that could be a quick fix if you can remember, create a new habit, remember to swallow always before getting up. But also wake up the muscles, do some exercises to kind of wake up those muscles. That's what I would do in that scenario. And so I don't necessarily have to, if anyone has questions, feel free to shout out or pull me over later, that's okay too.
Do you work with a lot of people who have sleep difficulties?
Can you say it louder?
Oh, yeah, right.
Sleep?
Sleep difficulties, yeah. Do you work with people on that or?
No, not for speech therapy.
Okay.
Is it related to any of the things we talked about?
Maybe the cognition part or something.
Yeah, no, because I can't treat sleep, but I can treat
Okay.
cognition.
Okay.
Yeah, sleep hygiene is part of, right, having, yeah, but no. I would ask the doctor, and then exercise is helpful. It's a tough one, yeah. Hygiene.
Just a comment that I'm sure that these cognitive exercises are helpful. But there's an element, if cognition is impaired, there's an element of frustration too, because you're trying to do something. And Laura can testify that she's got all these dual time things. And there's this element of frustration that I can't do it. It makes me want to not try
Yeah,
because I'm going to fail.
yeah.
Any words of wisdom?
Well, I would go back to, this is more fear-based, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. But the other thing is, like, can you bridge yourself there? Can you, so sometimes people have trouble with conversation because they're worried that when they get in the spot, they might have trouble. And so how can you bridge yourself to get closer to that? And sometimes it's a strategy of just disclosing, gosh, this is really hard for me, but telling the other person, this is hard for me, but I'm trying, just bear with me. People in general are generous. So I don't know if that comes up with other people and that would be helpful to you. Or if it's coming here every day, then I think that's more, just reminding yourself why you're doing it, reminding yourself that this is helpful, and as soon as you stop doing it, then you're gonna have more of a decline, and that's not what you want. But you're also in a supportive environment here, right? And so part of that is picking your supports. That's why I mentioned there's an online group. That's going to be a very supportive environment too, because other people are experiencing the same thing. Does anybody else have some ideas on how to respond to that? Because
I've noticed as this Parkinson's keeps going on lately, I would say in the past year, I've noticed that I started inserting words like when we were talking earlier today. I meant to say atrophy, but I said apathy, or I'll say freeze or break or something like that. Is that more of a cognition thing, or is it just, hey, you're getting older? But I see it in myself more frequently. I'll be talking to this anyone, and through conversation, I'll say break instead of break. But you know what I said in context, because I wasn't talking about breaking up the leaves, I was stopping the cars.
Yeah, it's hard to know which one it is. I started having similar issues with word finding or replacing, saying the wrong word, but a similar word. It's called a semantic paraphasia, not that you care, but it's, I started having that in my 30s. And I probably know too much about it that it kind of freaked me out. So there's a normal aging process, but it's really hard to tease apart what's what. You might think about if that progresses with your other Parkinson's related symptoms, But in the end, I don't know how much it really matters. It's just kind of monitoring and go ahead.
It doesn't bother me that much, but I just noticing that it's happening more and more often. So, friends tell me, like, don't be so hard on yourself, you know, because I'm just conversing with you. Get some words mixed up. Sleep instead of sleep. I'm talking. And then I catch myself as soon as I spit the word out, I'm just like,
It's close. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's close enough that other people know what you're talking about and you have a supportive group, but you know, that might be an example of like just disclosure is helpful. Just letting people know, oh, sometimes I just mix up words, but you know what I meant, and that kind of takes some weight off.
is it like a cognition or early signs of dementia or things like that?
It's not early signs of dementia, not at all. But yeah, it's cognition, but is it, you know, normal aging or is it Parkinson's, that part?
That's what I meant, yeah, it's more Parkinson's kind of related.
But it's also part of normal aging, so just because that happens, I wouldn't think, oh, I'm getting dementia.
Yeah, I'm sure I do it at least every day, a couple times a day.
Yeah. I find it kind of comes in spurts for me where I have a lot of mix-ups and then I'm fine, fluent, so.
It doesn't mean that I'm stressed at the time, at the particular time, it's just a normal conversation.
Yeah, but we were our worst critic, right? So, yeah.
There's a comic strip called Frank and Ernest. Malaprop man. Malapropism is kind of what you're saying. They can actually be humorous.
Yeah, I think I've seen that.
Write it down, let's laugh over it.
Nice.
Yeah, it's making humorous. I know that, like, I'll have conversations with my girlfriend, we'll be in a women's group. And I can't tell you how many of us will say, I walk into a room, and I'm doing something, I think, oh, I gotta go do this. I walk into the room and I do that, and then I've forgotten what I was doing before. And I don't think that that's, it's definitely a cognitive issue, it's a memory issue, it's, you gave it a name.
You know.
I know, but is it part of aging, because?
Yes, normal aging.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is normal aging, right? So I don't want to spend too much time talking about cognition and then you think that's what's on your brain now, because a lot of this is normal aging. Does anybody have any tips for what to do for that?
Back through.
Yeah, turn around and go back into the other
Yeah.
room and then come back.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll tell you what's worked for me. Repetition, which seems like a very simple strategy, but I found that if I repeat something 3 times, I'll remember. So the example I give is my office in my house is upstairs in one corner, my husband's office is downstairs in another corner, and we have supplies in both. And so if I need to go downstairs and get stamps and tape, I'm going to tell myself before I leave my office, stamps and tape. I'm walking down the hall, stamps and tape. Before I get to the stairs, I'm going to say it again, stamps and tape, because I know that I'm gonna have all these intervening thoughts of everything that I need to do that day. Get to his office and be like, oh, what did I come here for? But even if that happens, I've said it 3 times and I know what I went there for. So try that, just 3 times, see if you can hold that.
The other thing I learned from a presentation one time was to make something ridiculous. So if you want stamps, stamps that you think of a Christmas tree and it's all got stamps on it and tape all over the place.
Yes, that's
And
the
once you
visual
get it
image.
in, then you go, oh yeah, I remember, it's the Christmas tree with the stamps and the tape
Yes.
all over it.
Did
Yeah.
you say that louder?
The trick they taught me long ago at a presentation was that you make something really ridiculous. Okay, so if you want stamps and tape, you say, okay, it's going to be a Christmas tree, and instead of ornaments, there's all stamps and tape, all these kind of tape dispensers or whatever, or just make some ridiculous thing. And then, like, I use a lot of times for the grocery store, like I'll go to the grocery store, what's hanging there? Celery's hanging there, you know? So, and that's how I remember it. It's something so bizarre that it sticks with you.
Oh,
You know, it's not like I wouldn't just think of stamp, a little stamp and a thing of tape. Make it, you know, tape all over a car or, you know, something bizarre.
yeah.
So I would use that for when you need to remember something a little bit longer, right?
Okay.
Like just going into another room. But because it's kind of you have to learn that a little bit. Like I had to practice that visualization technique a little bit before I kind of got good at it. But you also kind of want to devote a little bit of time with making your image. So I like to use that for something I need to remember like 3 hours later. But if I'm just trying to get to, you know, another room and remember, I might use something a little bit quicker. But that's a memory strategy that, yeah, that we use. Yes, sir.
2 questions. One, is this presentation on your website?
No. Like this whole, no.
Because if one of the issues arise and you want to do something about it, does a ED patient call you? They're gonna put,
Yeah, and I have cards up here. There is information on my website, but not like I thought about doing more of like an overview, like everything you want to know if you're diagnosed with Parkinson's. I just haven't sat down to do that.
like, no, is any of that on the website? Because, you know, you kind of went over it real fast.
Facial expressions is there.
So some of the things are there.
Yeah, some of the things are there.
And that video.
Yeah, that's the facial expression video. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, you can call me and be happy to answer any questions. I have on my website like a 15-minute consultation, like just have questions. You can just reach out to me and I'm happy to support anybody, whatever they're dealing with.
She's very good about getting back to you. She's very good about it.
I try, I'm getting too busy these days. Yeah, I have business cards and then I also have this card